If the Ukraine war is a proxy war between Russia and the US, the Gaza war is the culmination of a long-running proxy war between Iran and Israel. For the past 20 years, Iran has repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the map and has spent billions of dollars building a ring of fire around Israel in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Yemen. Israel unsurprisingly views Iran as an existential threat and has devoted its best resources, intelligence and otherwise, to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear bomb. The Israel-Hamas war has many contexts. One of the most important and yet little known one is a game of wits between the Mossad and Iran that has seriously altered the balance of power in the Middle East. This story of espionage, cyber warfare, assassination is the subject of this video. Hi, I'm David Wu, a former IMF economist and Wall Street strategist with a 20-year track record of making actionable predictions about the big stories shaping our world tomorrow. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today in my home, in my garden. I know we're about an hour drive, in case you're wondering, from Gaza. Underneath, Israeli fighter jets. I don't know if you can hear them. But today I want to talk about this book, Target Tehran, which I just finished reading. And I have to say, I was absolutely fascinated. And then I was so fascinated, I said, well, I need to basically do a show about the book, because the book really is about the game of wits between Israel and, of course, its archenemy, Iran. And what's interesting about this book, of course, is that you don't even have to be interested in politics to be interested in it, because this is like Jean Le Carré spy stuff. It's actually better than a spy fiction because it's real. It's about the inner workings of the Mossad, the famed Israeli intelligence agency, the war that it waged behind the scenes against Iran and how Iran tried to fight back. It really tells you a lot about what's really been going on over the last decade that actually has culminated in the Hamas attack on October 7th. And I have the greatest pleasure, and I have to say I'm very lucky, to have one of the authors of the book, Ilan Evyatar, an Israeli who grew up in England, for many years a senior editor at the Jerusalem Post and an editor-in-chief of Jerusalem Report. And he is his co-author, spent the last few years interviewing former heads of Mossad, the current and the former heads of, basically Israel Prime Minister, as well as many people in the US and elsewhere, to basically put together this fascinating account. And I strongly urge you to read it if you get your hand on the book. So thank you very much, Ilan, for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
People who are going to be watching this video, some of them are pro-Israel, others are pro-Palestinians. It doesn't really matter. We want to basically make this video as relevant to as many people as possible. Iran has created a ring of fire, around Israel that today consists of at least 19 armed groups that are based in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and the West Bank. They include, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah. The Wall Street Journal, 2 weeks ago, ran a story in which it quoted unnamed senior members of both Hamas and Hezbollah saying that it was Iran that not only helped basically plan the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, but that Iran actually gave the final go-ahead. Iran has no border with Israel. The two countries are not economic competitors. Iran is 75 times bigger in terms of its territorial basic expanse than tiny Israel. Sure, there's the Palestinian issue, but other Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, like Jordan, that support the Palestinian cause, they don't call for the total destruction of Israel. Why does Iran hate Israel so much?
Well, David, thank you for that question. Let's first of all address the issue of, as you said, Iran has threatened many times to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, off the passage of time. And what we saw on October 7, our book was written before this attack, but what we saw on October 7 with the attack by Hamas, the brutal genocidal attack by Hamas, is that when an enemy threatens to wipe you off the face of the earth, and the Hamas charter calls for the destruction of Israel, then you need to take them seriously. As you say, these are no empty threats. Now let's go back in time as to the roots of the animosity between, I would say, the Islamic Republic of Iran, because Iran under the Shah and Israel were actually the best of friends. In 1979, when the Islamic Republic came to power, one of the first acts of its leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, was to give as a gift the Israeli embassy in Tehran to the leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat. And he told him, the first thing we will do once we solidify the revolution is to march to Jerusalem and free Palestine. So there's a very deep theological basis to Iran's animosity towards Israel, and there's a battle also within the Muslim world. First of all, there's a battle between Sunnis and Shias. Islamic Republic of Iran wants to be the regional hegemon, and the path there leads through Jerusalem.
The CIA reported back in March this year that it's found uranium particles enriched to 83.7% at Iran's Fordow underground nuclear facility. And this is a very important finding because 83.7%, it's much, much higher than what is necessary for commercial nuclear purpose. Indeed, a U.S. Defense Department official told Congress earlier this year that Iran is now only 12 days away from acquiring enough weapon-grade uranium for one bomb if it decides to do so. The question is, does the intelligence community here in Israel agree with this assessment? How close is Iran from getting a bomb? And how soon, before it can use it? Because I think that is a very important question. I understand it takes probably another year or two before Iran figures out how to mount such a bomb on a missile. But what about a dirty bomb that could be smuggled into Israel by the terrorists and detonated from afar?
Right, as you say, Iran has been violating its obligations under the 2015 nuclear accords, the JCPOA, which America withdrew from in 2018, and which the other member states are still a party to. And it has a significant amount of enriched uranium. The 80-something plus percent uranium is only a very minuscule amount, but it has a large amount of 60% enriched uranium already. If you understand the nuclear cycle, you can enrich that further to 90% in a very short time, and then it would have sufficient uranium for several nuclear bombs. As you correctly say, that it then has to miniaturize and weaponize, etc., to get them on a ballistic missile, which is something that could take anywhere between 6 months to 2 years, according to intelligence estimates. Now, one of the subjects of our book, of Target Tehran, is how Israel has constantly acted to slow down and thwart Iran's nuclear progress through various acts of sabotage and covert operations. There were many operations in which things, and we obviously can't say who did them, but according to foreign reports, and indeed according to Iran, they were done by Israel. So I think we can say that it's likely that Israel will continue to slow down that effort. And as to the question of a dirty bomb, that is obviously a major problem. I mean, but that would be crossing a threshold that would be tantamount to a nuclear attack with all the ramifications that would bring.
But by the way, is it technically possible to, let's say, for a dirty bomb to be smuggled into Israel without being detected? Because obviously it's radioactive, right? So do they have monitors, okay, that can identify these things, from from many miles away, for example?
I don't think we can get into the technical details of it, but if a weapon exists and a will exists to smuggle that weapon, then obviously it's possible, and obviously the other side is taking measures to prevent that from happening.
Henry Kissinger, no matter what you think about Kissinger, whether you like him, you don't like him, he's been, I think, in many ways, an oracle when it comes to international affairs for much of the last 5 decades. And he recently said that there will never be peace in the Middle East if Iran manages to acquire nuclear weapons. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I certainly agree that it's a very destabilizing factor for Iran to have to be a nuclear power, not only for Israel but also for Iran's traditional rivals in the Middle East. If Iran were to get nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia would want nuclear weapons. If Saudi Arabia had nuclear weapons, Turkey would want nuclear weapons. Egypt would want nuclear weapons. So that would be an extremely destabilizing move, and I think it's something that Israel and the Sunni countries and the West simply cannot afford to happen.
Your book, documents how the Mossad, sabotage and set back Iran's nuclear program. And it bought the world a little time, and by doing so, essentially changed the balance of power of the entire Middle East. And that was one of the great takeaways for me personally after having read the book. And the Mossad's basically very first challenge, as you describe in the book, was to present the world with incontrovertible proof that Iran was trying to build nuclear weapons. And then your story began with a meeting in 2016 between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the new Mossad head at the time, Yossi Cohen. Now, can you talk to us about the purpose of that meeting? What mission was Yossi Cohen given by Netanyahu, and the culmination events that unfolded following that meeting?
Israel had been operating against Iran's nuclear program since the early 2000s, but in 2016, when Yossi Cohen became the Mossad director, he met with Netanyahu, and they decided that one of the first things they needed to do in connection with Iran was to show the world that Iran is lying about its nuclear program. And this was basically an attempt to use intelligence to influence policy. Because the year earlier, in the previous year, the Iran and the P5+1, the world powers plus Germany, had signed this agreement, the nuclear accords, the JCPOA, with Iran. And Israel wanted the US to pull out of that. So it needed to get its hands on evidence that it would be able to present and influence other powers. And this went into full swing when Donald Trump became president, because he was very much against that nuclear deal. At one point, when the operation had already basically been planned, the Iranians moved their archive. Now, they moved it to this industrial neighborhood in northern Tehran called Shirabad, which is basically this sort of huge, sprawling mess of corrugated iron roofs, and it's just a drab industrial zone. Not the kind of place where you think this international spy drama will take place, but their thinking was, well, nobody's going to look here for that, which is probably a great idea, but only problem, Mossad was watching it all along. So meanwhile, they revised their plans and everything, and did, gathered new intelligence and all of that. When Donald Trump came to power, the time was ripe to do this and to influence policy. On the night of January 31, 2018, which was this pitch dark night, in fact with this very long lunar eclipse and a fog rolling into Tehran from the warm waters of the Persian Gulf, sort of gave them perfect conditions. It had some 24 agents, likely a mix of Mossad agents and local recruits. They gathered outside of this warehouse, and they knew they had, I think it was 6 hours and 29 minutes to pull off this operation and to enter the place. And then with special torches heated to 3,600 degrees, they cut through 6 of the safes where they knew they would find exactly what they were looking for. So they extracted from there something like 50,000 documents and another 500 CDs that they hadn't even been looking for, which was kind of a bonus point. And they extracted all of that to a truck or to a couple of trucks, and they made their way out of the country. They left an hour before the guards came back, so they had a bit of a head start. I'm not allowed to say how they got out, but Iran has various borders, and there are various options to get out of there. And there's a very active drug smuggling route with Azerbaijan that could, for example, have been used, and you could have fooled drug smugglers into basically taking this out of there and then getting it back to Israel. And once it was in Israel, they spent the next 3 months recruiting Parsi-speaking analysts, etc., to go over this material. And then 3 months later, Netanyahu held this very dramatic press conference where he sort of pulled aside a curtain and showed everyone these files, these bookshelves full of files, and the big slide saying Iran has lied and everything, and that served to get President Donald Trump to pull out of the JCPOA, which he did 3 weeks later.
This is a good example of a spy operation that actually changed the course of event, to the extent that I imagine, Trump might not have pulled out of the deal as quickly as he did without that piece of evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, and what was unusual about the whole operation is that it was made public. It was part of the attempt to use intelligence to influence policy, because that's not the kind of thing you usually do. And there were quite sort of big debates within the Israeli intelligence and military community about what to do, with this intelligence. There was a lot of criticism as well of Netanyahu for using this. He was accused of using it for political gain and everything, but in the end, it managed to sway policy. Whether that was a good idea or not is a separate question, because Iran was within the constraints of the JCPOA and was mostly sticking to the JCPOA. But Israel, for strategic reasons, wanted it out of there. Now, as we know and as we've discussed, Iran has a very significant amount of enriched uranium to a level that can very quickly be taken to a nuclear weapons level.
Israel, off and on over the last 10 years, has been considering taking matters into his own hand and basically bomb Iran's nuclear sites, right? The whole idea would be that, to set them back, basically by 5 years, 10 years. And Israel did this against, Iraq, right? And then it did that also against Syria, when they had their own basically nuclear aspirations, right? And then in your book, you talk about how various different people, including Mayor Dagan and maybe the US, they were against an Israeli unilateral attack on Iran. So it never really happened. Now that time has passed, Iran presumably has already made it more difficult for, the US or Israel to come in and basically bomb its basically nuclear facility. Can it be done? Does the Hamas attack on Israel make it more or less likely that Israel will go down this path?
Well, let's look first of all at whether it can be done and the history of its previous attacks. As you note, Israel destroyed the Iraqi reactor, and Israel destroyed a Syrian reactor built by North Korea, financed by Iran in Deir ez-Zor in 2007. And Israel has a doctrine, the Begin doctrine, that says it will never allow weapons of mass destruction to fall into the hands or to be acquired by its enemies, especially those who declare that they would be willing to use them. But the big difference there is that in both these cases, there was one nuclear facility that had to be destroyed. So it was relatively easy. Iran is a huge country, and it has nuclear facilities spread all over that country. They are well defended. Some of them are buried deep inside mountains. So any attack would be hugely difficult. It would probably come at a very heavy cost to Israel. It could lose planes. It would need to strike with many planes, probably in 2 or 3 strikes. And it would be a very challenging mission. But yes, I think Israel is capable of pulling it off. But any such attack would come, I think, only when, as Mayor Dagan defined it, when the sword is at Israel's neck, when there's really no other choice, no other way of slowing down their program, and they're literally, at the point where if we don't do it, then they will become a nuclear power. Now, Israel and the US have different red lines. The point where for Israel nothing can be done is different to that the US considers as where nothing can be done. Iran is an existential threat to Israel and not to the United States. So those two red lines differ somewhat.
So what is the red line for Israel?
The red line is where Israel feels that if Iran goes beyond that point, Israel won't be able to do anything to stop it.
Right.
Which is basically, somewhere before you put together the capability to have enriched uranium and to build a bomb and to deliver that bomb.
So the delivery is obviously going to be very important as well, as far as the red line is concerned.
Israel's red line comes somewhere before that.
Sure.
Because it can't allow Iran to reach the point where it both has enriched uranium to military levels, and it has the military capability to deliver them. So it needs to do something somewhere before those two things come together.
And do you trust Israeli intelligence to be so good that it can actually know whether Iran already has the missile technology or not, for example?
One thing we've learned from this Hamas attack is that you can't always trust your intelligence. So maybe that will move that red line, that will shift that red line somewhat. Israel is a very small country, only 24,000 square kilometers, with a very dense population center. And as you say, one bomb would do huge damage to Israel. Iran is the size of half of Western Europe, basically, with a population about 8 times that of Israel. So there's an absolute asymmetry there.
Your book, you talk about how, basically Israel's determination to stop the Iranian nuclear program actually brought Israel much closer to the moderate Arab states, that saw Iran as the greatest threat to their own security. And by that, we're talking about the UAE, the Saudis, and so on and so forth. Can you please talk about the evolution of this partnership and how it's changing the political realignment in the Middle East?
First contacts between Israel and the UAE started after the Oslo Accords, but it was really in 2000 and in the sort of early to mid 2000s when Meir Dagan was the director of Mossad that this sort of strategy came into being, and the initial contacts were made with the UAE, which Israeli intelligence felt was the country that would have the sort of the guts to go through with something like this. And in about 2005, 2006, David Maidan, who was the head of the Mossad's Tevel department, its foreign relations department, which runs ties with countries with which Israel doesn't have diplomatic relations, held a number of meetings with UAE officials and gradually started to build up that trust and ties, business ties, defense ties with the UAE, which by the time the agreement was signed had basically become an open secret. And Mossad director Yossi Cohen, who was in charge when all of this went through, had to sort of finalize building that trust and building the relations to the point where the UAE was willing to sort of cross the Rubicon and have open ties with Israel, have formal ties with Israel.
Also, basically, Saudi Arabia. I think, in your book you mentioned that they were prepared to allow Israel to use its airspace should Israel decide to go and attack Iran, and then that they were actually sharing intelligence with Israel, right?
Yeah, they've shared intelligence. In fact, they've shared intelligence with Israel. They've various things that perhaps we can't discuss. But shortly before we completed our book, Saudi Arabia and Israel were said to be very close to normalizing relations. And then suddenly we had this Iran-Saudi rapprochement, and everybody was saying, this puts an end to any possibility of Saudi-Israeli normalization. And we went back to our sources who said, no, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen, perhaps by early 2024. And then things, that proved to be at least for a while, a correct gamble. But then we had this October 7 attack by Hamas, and that has kind of put everything on ice for the moment, because that was one of its goals, was to undermine Saudi-Israeli normalization and to undermine the whole American strategy in the Middle East. And even the Iranian leadership has sort of boasted that, hey, we've succeeded in putting this on ice. But I think whether we will now have Saudi normalization with Israel depends very much on the outcome of this whole conflict. As if Israel is perceived as weak, then there's no reason for the Saudis to go ahead with this. And on the other hand, they're very scared of Iran. They're very scared of the Muslim Brotherhood, of Hamas. So they want Israel to succeed in this as much as anyone.
I thought it was rather interesting, right? I mean, there were reports last night that the Houthis actually launched a few missiles, basically at Saudi Arabia, but also at Israel, and the Saudis actually shut down these missiles. So from that point of view, like, Saudis actually taking steps on his own to actually help neutralize some of this threat that's been directed at Israel.
One of the things that Israel and Saudi Arabia and other countries were reportedly working on was a regional defense architecture with the radar systems of all the countries working in coordination under the umbrella of the United States CENTCOM, which is in charge of that region for the U.S. Military. So today, a senior former Israeli defense official, said, well, obviously we can't discuss details, but look at the regional defense architecture that was being built up.
Before the Hamas attack on Israel, Washington, the Biden administration specifically, was pushing very hard for this three-way deal between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. And as I've argued in my other videos, that this was very much intended to sabotage, the Chinese-sponsored peace agreement between, Saudi Arabia and Iran. To me, what's amazing is just how far the Biden administration is prepared to go to make this deal happen. I mean, they were strongly suggesting that the U.S. is prepared to basically agree nuclear partnership with Saudi Arabia to make this deal happen. The U.S., certainly under Biden, which is a continuation of policy of Obama, has not been willing to take a hard line on Iran's nuclear program. And now this administration, the Biden administration, wants to help, Saudi Arabia to get on the nuclear warpath as well. To me, this seems to be highly destabilizing. What do you think about the American proposal and the fact that Bibi doesn't seem to be strongly objecting to it?
The proposal is for a civil nuclear program, but the Saudis want to have the enrichment process on their soil and to be in charge of that enrichment process, which as we all know, is the first step towards eventually building a nuclear bomb. So I don't think there's certainly a lot of people in the Israeli intelligence and defense establishment who are against that. They would like to see controls that would prevent Saudi Arabia from making the kind of nuclear progress that would eventually lead it to a bomb. And I'm not sure that a deal would go ahead if it gave the Saudis that possibility. I mean, there are many ways to provide civil nuclear energy without having to go down that route that gives the Saudis control of the entire enrichment process. Either the enrichment would be on Saudi soil with very tight controls, and Israeli officials have spoken of various technological means that can be used to control that, or it would have to be something that would some kind of agreement that would give them their civil nuclear energy, but without the ability to enrich uranium on Saudi soil.
Given the success of Israeli intelligence, basically operations in Iran, how can we explain the failure of the Israeli intelligence to anticipate and prepare for the Hamas attack on Israel October 7th?
First of all, it's a question of how deeply Iran was involved in this attack. We don't know if they gave the order, we don't know if they knew exactly when this was going to happen, but it certainly aligns with its strategy. Iran finances Hamas, Iran trains Hamas, Iran smuggles weapons to Hamas. So they're at the very least complicit in what happened. As to how Israel allowed this to happen, and there was a complete failure of both its security concept and its operational readiness. For many years now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been pushing the view, and the defense establishment as well, that we can separate between Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and thus, and from Netanyahu's perspective, that's something that can be used to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. But Israel really took its eye off the ball and allowed itself to be fooled by Hamas, which executed, militarily speaking, a very sophisticated attack.
It's now almost 3 days, since Israel entered into Gaza. If you recall, 2 weeks ago, the Iranian foreign minister actually warned if Israel were to go down this path, there would be dire consequences. So far, nothing has happened, at least not coming from Iran. Even the Hezbollah, there has been no escalation in terms of attack on Israel. In fact, actually, if you listen to what the Hamas has been saying, they're actually rather disappointed. They haven't seen more help coming from, Lebanon, from Hezbollah. So what do you think is going on? I mean, of course, it's still early day in the war. Do you think, based on what happened in the last 3 days, Iran and Hezbollah are more likely or less likely to engage directly in this conflict?
Well, Hezbollah at the moment is attacking Israel, let's call it, under the threshold of war. Daily attempts to cross the border, to infiltrate the border. There are daily mortar fire against Israel, anti-tank missiles fired at Israeli positions, at Israeli communities. But so far we haven't crossed the threshold. But all it takes is either a decision from Hezbollah and Iran to do so, or perhaps a mistake that can lead to an escalation, a missile that hits, kills a few people and leads to a more severe Israeli response that leads to a circle of violence that eventually ends up in all-out war. And of course, there's also the possibility that Israel itself will decide to eventually strike Hezbollah. A lot of people, a lot of voices within the military and the defense community have called for Israel to take out Hezbollah, and there's a lot of sense to that. Hezbollah is Iran's main tool in the region, and Israel, and there are tens of thousands of people who have been displaced from northern communities. Now, many of them won't be willing to go back unless that Hezbollah threat has been removed, and that is something Israel cannot afford to happen.
Ilan, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insight with us. I learned a lot. I'm sure the viewers would have learned a lot as well. Target Tehran, Simon Schuster, came out just last month. I think it's a worthy read. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
If you got something out of this program, please hit like and subscribe to my free YouTube channel. Let me know what you think by posting your comments on the video. If you want to learn more about my investment strategy, come visit us at davidwuunbound.com.